I'm very optimistic about Kenya and Africa as well. We have got statistics and empirical evidence to show that Africa is indeed the future in many ways. It's driven by a lot of factors. So a young and growing population that will provide the future talent base, the future market for the global producers, and indeed a significant amount of unexploited resources of many sorts on the continent of Africa.
But it sounds to me more like I'm not sure if this is Africa's wish or wishful thinking, because in fact your low-tech manufacturing has dropped in terms of production and in terms of exports, and now you're importing a huge number of Chinese cheap products.
Correct. Look, I think China has had a significant amount of advantage. They have the scale. China turned into the factory of the world, where not only Africa but many countries globally have moved their productions into China. And some of the opportunities that I'm talking about is this is now the perfect time for Africa to become what China was many years ago. We've got significant amount of labor that is, fairly, inexpensive, so to speak.
But for the time being, they're building infrastructure with credit and bartering with your own natural resource.
Building infrastructure is also something that we so much need. But just on the point of moving...
But Minister, the French also built ports and infrastructure. We called it colonialism at the time.
So one of the things that has made Africa lag behind for a very long time are issues around high cost of doing business on the continent. We are still so backward in many areas in terms of infrastructure.
So basically it's going to be cheaper for the Chinese to import your natural resources. How is that a good thing?
We have traditionally been a fairly high commodity-based economies. Whether it is in West Africa where we export...
This is just a fancy way of saying you're selling your natural resources.
We do, and we do in raw form, unprocessed form. A lot of our cocoa is exported to Europe, comes back as chocolates and all this.
And you import manufactured products,
100%,
more expensive,
100%.
Making you more dependent.
100%.
And I don't see that changing, Minister.
No, that is going to change. And we do the same.
Where's the plan? Where's the vision? Where's the will?
No, there is the will, there is the plan. You see, as I said, there are things that you can't do just overnight, but you must have a plan. And I've said to you that African governments and leadership have now recognized that this must stop. We know the facts, we know where the opportunities are. There are things that we can't do naturally because we don't have the skills, we can't do it overnight. But areas where we can do significant amount of value addition, we will do. What I think is different in Africa now is there is different caliber of leadership. There's a lot more forward-looking groups of people that are now working much more closer with the private sector. You see, what we can't do is we can't lock out everybody and think we can develop.
But you're signing contracts that says 70% of the labor for all these projects is going to be Chinese.
Well, there are cases like that in different parts. It's not like
most
that.
cases.
It's not like that.
No. That no one else wants to do.
There is competition. There is no infrastructure project today. And I could say that for Africa, but suddenly in markets like Kenya, there's no infrastructure project that Chinese do without it being put on a tender, international tender, people bid, and the most appropriate...
And the Chinese win.
Chinese win. That is the nature of the open nation.
But we know that even before the process starts, because they're providing the credit, they're the ones who are ready to do the barter, and they are ready to underprice the rest because they have a long-term plan. They want to take over.
I think there are many things the Chinese have been criticized for, but the point is we want to provide, service to our people. We need to build the infrastructure. We need to do what we need to do, but want to get that at the most competitive price and quality. And all those are specified. If the Chinese happens to get it, so be it.
But let's talk about this new elite of business people and politicians with a different take on African economy. Are their interests rooted in the continent, or are they rooted in the relationship with those outside corporations and governments and so on?
Well, I think Africa has a significant number of challenges. The income gap is huge between the rich, the business elites, and the majority of people. Unemployment is extremely high. And
So let's admit it. Africans are not benefiting.
no. Those things are there. I mean, it's and by the way, it's got nothing to do with China. There are a lot of multinationals that are operating on the continent of Africa, and we are asking ourselves as Africans, what do we need to do differently? And you will see that significant strides are being made to make things much more happen on the ground in Africa than actually being happening in other places. Circumstances is forcing other people to do that, by the way. As I say to you, cost of labor, especially for labor-intensive industries, will gravitate towards Africa. That we're seeing. We'll see things like textile and others moving from traditional markets like China into the continent of Africa, and we've got huge opportunities to do cotton.
But we've seen your statistics, and they've been dropping. Your low-tech manufacturing, your labor-intensive manufacturing has dropped over the last decade.
It has, and
because the Chinese cheap products have made their way into the continent.
Absolutely. And if you look at West Africa, many textile factories in Nigeria, for example, has crashed, and the same in Kenya.
I rest my case.
Because of some of the cheap imports. But what I have said is, these imports will continue to be there, and I think that's where government policies needs to come in. There are bits and pieces of policies that can be deployed to actually attract investments into these countries. But we need to find out, why is it that people want to establish themselves in some of those other countries and not Africa? And there are a lot of historical issues that needs to be fixed. We must make the grounds convenient and conducive for people to want to come and invest in Africa. The unfortunate thing is, there are things that you can do as a country, as government, and there are things that you need to do with support of private capital or foreign capital. And foreign capital flows around in many things. There's nothing wrong in Chinese buying plants in Europe. But when they are buying, things on the continent of Africa, a lot of people make a lot of issues out of it. I think the important thing is, ultimately, people must do things in Africa to benefit their citizens and the nationals.
One of your leading economists, David Ndei, have just written about how there is an indigenous oligarchy rising and expanding and dependent on foreign interests. You share that kind of view?
Well, I think indigenous businesses are, we support that in terms of making sure that whilst we attract foreign investors in the country, local investors also are, should expand. I think what we have seen is.
Speaking of electricity.